Directed by Peter Kominick, and this is a kind of Lost in the Woods style horror movie. It focuses on this woman who we meet at the beginning of the movie who seems to be lost in the wilderness somewhere. She has very little supplies. We don't know how she's got there. We just see she's kind of got a variety of sort of small wounds, and she's going to try to survive off the land. And we follow her, and we learn that she might not be alone. There might be some dark forces out in these woods, potentially some supernatural shenanigans going on, maybe even a few creatures. And as well as that, we get some flashbacks to tell us how she ended up in this kind of situation. And we meet her partner, how they met, and potentially a kind of a car accident that's maybe led to this kind of situation for her, and what's happened to this partner. What will happen? You have to watch the movie and find out. So before I watched this, I kind of glanced at a few reviews, and there was a couple of kind of negative ones, to be honest. But so I sort of watched it, thinking I was going to watch this sort of negative film and, you know, quite a poor film. But I was initially quite surprised at how competently and confidently this movie seemed to be directed, considering it's quite a low-budget movie. Now, I will say, as the film progressed, I kind of started to see some of the flaws, but I will say I do think, considering this is a low-budget movie, there's definite artistic flourishes behind the camera here, with some, you know, strong direction. You know, the way, for example, the movie weaves between flashbacks and this kind of the current timeline, having these kind of transitions in quite kind of inventive manners and things like this. Some of the kind of the you know, the artistic sort of shots and shot compositions and things like that, I also thought was actually sort of fairly strong. You know, so I will say on a technical level, this movie is actually fairly kind of well put together. And again, you've got to consider this is clearly kind of a low budget film. The other thing I would say, for the most part, not everything, but the kind of the effects that we see practically realised in regards to kind of creatures, I think is quite well done. There's a little bit of gore, a little bit of kind of creature effects, you know, and I've got to say, I think it looks pretty good. And this movie definitely has a sort of, you know, spooky vibe to it, where it's not really kind of clear about what's actually out there, what's actually kind of going on. And I do think it has an element of some sort of, you know, occultist or some sort of ancient sort of forces that are out in these woods that this woman is now having to contend with. And you kind of are learning a little bit about it. Maybe it's some sort of you know, pagan style witch or something like that. And, you know, it has its kind of creepy moment. It's almost a kind of a Blair Witch vibe without really being like a found footage movie or anything like that. I think the movie has a reasonable twist in it as well. As the film goes on, you know, I won't obviously spoil it for you, but I think, oh, do you know what? That kind of changes the status quo a little bit, and that's kind of quite an interesting sort of twist. So I kind of quite enjoyed that. You know, the movie offers you a number of different sort of potential reasons for what's going on. You know, there could be supernatural elements. There could be genuine creatures out in these woods. But it could be hallucinations caused by drugs. It could be hallucinations caused by just anxiety and stress of this woman out in the woods on her own. You know, dehydration, things like this. Could be any number of things. And I think the movie is deliberately trying to be somewhat sort of ambiguous and vague about what's kind of going on, keep you kind of guessing, you know, as the film kind of goes through its kind of runtime, to sort of think, you know, what is the sort of situation here? So I do think this movie has some legitimate artistic merit. Now, I'm not a huge fan of surreal movies, to be honest with you, but I think this one sort of has enough sort of its feet on the ground, at least, to kind of like keep me interested at the very least. So let's talk about what doesn't work. Now, I think some people may say the acting isn't strong in this movie, but I actually think the acting is maybe not the problem. I think the main problem that I kind of came across in this movie, as much as I think the technical elements are fairly strong, there's one technical element that isn't, and that is the audio mixing. The audio mixing is quite awful. I'll give you two examples. The main one, however, is the ADR dialogue that has clearly been re-recorded over the kind of actors on set, which makes the acting seem wooden, because it doesn't really feel like it's coming from this environment that we see, these characters in. And it has this kind of inner studio kind of feel. It lacks that kind of ambient noise and that sort of echoey sound that you'll get if you're on the outside and things like this. So there's a real problem with, I think, the way the audio is recorded here. But not just with the dialogue. The other thing is that we have these kind of like creature effects. We have this kind of creature which we hear growling. We sort of see it from a kind of a POV view. It sounds so bad. It sounds so like just someone going in a microphone, and it's just terrible. So I think there's some truly terrible audio in this movie, which is a shame, because I do think at least on the filmmaking, the camera work here is strong. And the kind of, even like the post-production, like they said, like the editing and stuff, I think it's strong. It's just the same. The audio is it's so like fake sounding, so overdone. And I guess you could arguably say, well, at least we can hear the people talking, and great. But it sounds like really like artificial, unfortunately. And I think the knock-on effect of that, it makes the acting seem quite poor, because the dialogue, again, it's not recorded in the situations where these characters are in. It just sounds fake to me. I mean, at least that's how it comes across. If someone's involved in this movie tells me, oh no, all the dialogue is recorded on location, I'd be surprised. But in that case, it is poor acting. But yeah, for whatever the reason, it doesn't come across. The audio isn't strong, or the dialogue seems very kind of like fake sounding. However, it ended up like that. The other thing I think this movie is maybe guilty of is ultimately being, a little sort of. The movie's trying to keep the audience guessing about what's going on, keeping the audience in the dark, being vague about the actual sort of plot, being mysterious, being surreal. And in doing so, I think the movie ends up becoming a little frustrating and a little bit slow, because you feel like you're watching something where you don't really know what's going on, and you're seeing lots of images, and you don't really know the context, and it ultimately, because you're not then pulled into the story, it becomes a little dull. And this is the danger when you have things like this, where it's like, oh, we're gonna kind of like hide the intention of the movie, and we're gonna have this kind of this surreal film where you're not going to quite know what's going on, and that's all good for artistic flourishes. But when you're watching this as a piece of entertainment, you are not invested, because you are not quite sure what you're watching, and it just seems like a bunch of random scenes at times, and that is the knock-on effect of doing it like that. And I do understand the criticism. This movie kind of seems dull. It's a woman traipsing around in the woods, seeing weird things, and all of a sudden those weird things are not there anymore. And then we can look at the flashbacks, and we have this kind of like this romance that kind of blossoms seemingly out of nowhere. I've got to say, I didn't feel that was particularly organic, I must say. But maybe people meet like this, whatever. We kind of learn a bit more about the context of these kind of characters, this woman and her partner and things like that. And, learn more about him and what he's been up to. And then, as I mentioned, I think the creature effects relatively strong, apart from one, which looks cheesy as hell. That's all I'll say. It's weird, because this movie has these elements where I think it does really well in regards to, again, for a low budget movie, the direction in regards to the photography, the editing, but then it really fails on the audio. And then we have effects where we have these various creatures which look pretty good, and then there's one which is a massive clunker. So as much as this movie succeeds, it fails in the same measure. And ultimately, because this movie, I think, is a little unsatisfying in regards to a narrative, because of the decision here to make this movie surreal and kind of like, you know, bury the lead about what's actually kind of going on. I have to say, I think as an audience member, you kind of lose interest. And you sort of, you know, your mind's drifting. You're not really paying attention because you're not engaged. And that's the danger when kind of filmmakers do this. You know, it's like, oh yeah, it's all well and good having this kind of like artistic flourishes, but when it ultimately becomes boring for an audience member, then you've kind of lost, haven't you? So for me, it's a slightly below average movie. It has its moments, it has some merit, but I don't think it's overall a particularly kind of interesting movie when it's all said and done. So 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What are your thoughts? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to you next time.